Before this story begins, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more rare and unforgettable stories that history almost left behind. These are tales of love, pain, survival, and quiet strength, and this one may be the most powerful of all. Now, listen closely. I was 13 when my father rode with me up the narrow mountain road that led to the old castle gates. The air was dry, the wind sharp, and I couldn't stop trembling, not from the cold, but from what I knew was coming. I wasn't going back home with him. That much was clear. He hadn't said it, but I could feel it in his silence, in the way he kept adjusting his gloves, in the way his jaw clenched every time he looked at me. The castle wasn't made of stone, not like you'd expect. It was wooden, high palisades surrounding a central fort that rose out of the cliffs like a fortress of bones. There were no guards, only shadows, and the eyes of men watching from the towers. But beside the gate stood a man with a long black braid, skin the color of dust, and eyes like thunderclouds. An Apache. He didn't move when we approached, just stared, calm, like he already knew what was about to happen. My father dismounted, tied his horse to the post, and then helped me down. His hands were shaking. Mine were too. But he gripped my shoulder firmly and said, "Stay strong, son." I opened my mouth to ask why. Why here? Why now? Why him? But no words came out. And then, in a moment so quiet I still hear it every night in my sleep, my father bent down beside me, placed one hand on the back of my neck, and whispered into my ear, "You're not a burden to me. You never were." Then he stood, walked toward the Apache, and offered him something, a small pouch, tied with leather. The man took it, nodded once, and then turned to me. I didn't know what was inside. Money. Gold. A favor? All I knew was that I was no longer my father's responsibility. I had been given away. The Apache looked down at me, not unkindly, but without pity. He extended his hand. And I, numb, confused, heart shattering inside my chest, took it. My father didn't say goodbye. He didn't turn back. He mounted his horse and disappeared into the mist like he was running from something too heavy to carry. And I stood there, holding the hand of a stranger, unsure if I'd just been sold, saved, or sacrificed. He didn't speak for the first few miles. We walked through a forest of dead pine and red soil. The sun was setting behind the peaks, casting shadows long enough to swallow us whole. Every crunch of leaves beneath our boots felt louder than my thoughts. When we finally reached his camp, a ring of stones, a small fire, a buffalo hide stretched between two trees, he motioned for me to sit. Still, no words. But in his silence, there was something strange. Not coldness, not cruelty, just patience. That night, I lay curled on the ground, shivering under a thin blanket. I stared at the stars through the branches and wondered what I'd done to deserve this. Was I too soft? Too weak? Was I another mouth to feed my father couldn't afford? I cried, quietly, silently, trying not to breathe too loud. And then I felt it. A heavy hide was laid over me, thicker, warmer. I looked up and saw the Apache man walking back to his side of the fire. Still no words. Just that one gesture. A small warmth in a world that had suddenly gone cold. The next morning, he cooked something over the fire, meat and beans. He handed me a bowl and watched as I ate like I hadn't seen food in weeks. Maybe I hadn't. Then, finally, he spoke. Just one word, Nakai. I blinked. He repeated it and pointed to himself. That was his name. Then he pointed at me. I hesitated. Caleb, I whispered. He nodded. We sat there, two strangers bound by silence and circumstance, sharing a meal neither of us had asked for. Over the following days, I followed him like a shadow. Nakai taught by doing, how to build traps, how to spot animal tracks, how to move without being heard. Every skill was survival. Every glance was a test. He never shouted, never struck me. He didn't treat me like a servant, but neither did he treat me like a child. I was expected to keep up, to carry my weight, and strangely, I wanted to. I wanted to prove that I wasn't a burden, that I belonged. One afternoon, we crossed paths with two white men on horseback. Traitors, maybe. One looked at me and sneered. "You let that boy follow you," he said to Nakai. "He don't look Apache." Nakai didn't answer. He just stared at them until they rode off, muttering something cruel. Later that night by the fire I asked him, "Why didn't you say anything?" He looked at me, then simply said, "Words are easy, but a man's worth is what he survives." Those words stuck with me. They buried themselves in my ribs like arrows and never left. I realized then that Nakai wasn't just giving me food and shelter. He was giving me something my father never had, a place where my value wasn't based on money or weight, but on resilience. I still missed my father. Missed his voice, his scent, the way he used to hum when he thought I was asleep. But Nakai was teaching me something different, something harder, something I would carry for the rest of my life. One morning, Nakai woke me before sunrise and pointed to the cliffs. We climbed in silence, breath visible in the cold air. When we reached the top, he gestured for me to sit. Below us, the land stretched for miles, red, gold, endless. "This," he said softly, "is where my mother died." He didn't cry, didn't flinch, just stared. I watched him, wondering why he brought me here. Then he turned to me and said, "You carry your father's eyes, but your own strength. That matters more than blood." In that moment, I realized he saw me, not just as a burden passed on, but as someone becoming. The lessons grew harder. He made me track a wounded deer for hours, through dry riverbeds and thick thornbrush. My hands bled. My legs ached. I wanted to scream, to quit, but Nakai never said, "You can do it." He just kept walking, forcing me to choose, follow or fall. And I followed. Every time. Because deep inside I knew, if I gave up, I'd be proving every cruel whisper right. That I was weak. That I was disposable. But Nakai never looked back to check. He just expected I'd be there. And I was. One night, while we ate roasted roots in silence, I asked him, "Did my father sell me?" He didn't answer at first. Just chewed slowly. Then finally said, "He gave you away, yes. But not because you were nothing. Because he believed someone else might see your worth." That answer broke me and healed me all at once. I had spent so long imagining I wasn't enough, but maybe, just maybe, my father hadn't abandoned me. Maybe he gave me a chance at something better. The nights were the hardest. The cold wasn't just in the air, it was inside me. The ache of not knowing if I'd ever return, if I'd ever see my father again. Sometimes I imagined running away, finding the road back, confronting him. But where would I go? What would I say? And every time I imagined that conversation, it ended the same way, with his whisper echoing in my head. "You're not a burden to me." A lie. Maybe. But it was the only truth I had to hold on to. We came upon a village once, Apache, like Nakai. The people stared when they saw me. A boy not their blood. Not their kind. One woman spat at the ground. Another pulled her child away. But Nakai simply placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "This is Caleb. He is mine." That moment rewired something in me. He hadn't just accepted me, he claimed me. In front of those who doubted, who judged. And I realized, he was no longer just my keeper. He was my father now, in every way that mattered. One day, Nakai was bitten by a snake while clearing a path. His legs swelled, turned purple. I carried him back to camp, panicked, breathless. He passed out. For 2 days, I fed him, changed the wrappings, kept the fire burning. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. When he opened his eyes again, he looked at me, truly looked, and whispered, "You are strong now." It was the first time I'd ever seen fear in his face, and the last time he would ever doubt me. I began leading our hunts, setting our traps, negotiating with passing traders. I wasn't a boy anymore. I was part of the land, and the land somehow accepted me. I spoke little like Nakai, watched everything, moved with quiet confidence, and though we never said it aloud, I knew he trusted me. I had become someone he could lean on, someone he could depend on, and that meant more than any title, any bloodline, any old castle walls. Then, one summer afternoon, we saw a rider in the distance. A horse I knew, a gait I recognized. It was my father. Older now, slower, eyes sunken. He dismounted and stood on the same path where he had left me. But this time, his hands were empty. He didn't speak, just stared. And I stared back. No longer the broken boy he once abandoned, but a man. Not because of age, but because of everything I had survived since the day he let go of my hand. He walked toward me and said, "I never forgot you." His voice cracked like dry wood. I watched from far. I waited. I hoped. I asked him why. Why leave me? Why give me away? And he said, "Because I didn't know how to teach you to be more than I was." But he could. He looked at Nakai, who stood behind me. And I see now, he did. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But something in the wind shifted, and for the first time, I saw my father not as a coward, but as a man who had loved me the only way he knew how. That evening, the three of us sat around the fire, Nakai, my father, and me. The silence was thick, but not heavy. My father shared stories from the years apart. The loss of my mother, the sickness that almost took him, the guilt that never left. He confessed he'd ridden past our camp many times, always watching from afar. He feared I'd hate him, that I'd be broken. But every time he saw me walking tall, carrying game on my shoulders, laughing with Nakai, he told himself, he doesn't need me anymore. That hurt. But it also healed something. Because I realized he hadn't given up on me, he just didn't know how to come back. Later that night, after my father had fallen asleep by the fire, Nakai looked at me and said something I wasn't expecting. "You must choose now," he said. "Stay, or go with him." I didn't answer immediately. My heart twisted. Nakai had become my world, my guide, my shelter. But I understood what he meant. The boy who had been left at the castle gates didn't exist anymore. And standing still wasn't growth. My journey had to continue, not to escape the past, but to carry what I'd learned into a future only I could shape. The next morning, before the sun had even warmed the trees, I packed what little I had. Nakai gave me a satchel, filled with tools, herbs, and a knife he had carved himself. "Not a gift," he said. "A reminder." I asked him, "Of what?" He replied, "That you were never traded. You were trusted." And those words shattered the last pieces of my doubt. My father hadn't sold me. He had hoped, maybe in desperation, maybe in love, that I would become something more than he ever could have made me. As we rode away from the camp, I looked back one last time. Nakai stood near the fire, arms crossed, face calm. He didn't wave, didn't speak, but I felt his presence like armor around my chest. I knew we would see each other again, but I also knew part of me would always stay behind with him. The trees whispered around us, the wind carrying the smell of wood smoke and dry earth. I breathed in, deeply, and let go of everything that had once made me feel small. We rode for days, mostly in silence. My father was quieter than I remembered, older, sadder. But there was a gentleness now that hadn't been there before. He asked about Nakai, about what I learned, about who I'd become, and I answered honestly. For the first time, we weren't just father and son. We were two men, sharing a road. And slowly, I forgave him. Not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. And forgiveness, I learned, is a kind of freedom. A freedom I'd earned the hard way. We reached the town near the castle after a week. People stared as I passed. I was no longer the boy they remembered. My skin was tougher, my eyes sharper. I didn't shrink beneath their glances. I didn't need their approval. I had found something greater than their judgment. I had found myself. And when the castle gates creaked open again, I didn't feel fear. I felt power. Because I wasn't returning as a child. I was walking in as a man, forged not by bloodlines or names, but by the fire of the desert and the silence of a warrior. Inside, the halls looked smaller than I remembered. The stones less intimidating. My room still held the blanket I'd left behind, folded on the bed. I sat there for a moment, touching the fabric, remembering the boy who once cried himself to sleep. And then, I let him go. That version of me, scared, uncertain, had served his purpose. But now I carried something stronger: memory, skill, purpose, and above all, worth. Over time, my father and I rebuilt our relationship. Slowly, carefully. There were still cracks, but no more walls. He started calling me son again, not as a title, but as a truth. And I called him father, not out of duty, but choice. He never tried to erase what had happened. He simply owned it. And I respected that more than any apology. Because real love doesn't hide behind pride. It stands in the open, even when it's trembling. Years later, I returned to the forest where Nakai and I once camped. The fire pit was gone, but the tree he carved his name into still stood. I placed my hand over the etching, closed my eyes, and whispered, "Thank you." Because he had not only taught me how to survive, he taught me how to see, how to live, how to walk without shame. And for that, I owed him more than words could say. Now I tell this story not for sympathy, but for truth. Because somewhere out there, someone believes they were thrown away. Someone believes they are a burden. But let me say what my father whispered to me in my darkest hour: you are not a burden. You are the start of something sacred, something powerful. And your worth is not measured by who kept you, or who left, but by what you become when you rise. Subscribe to this channel if this story moved you. We share stories like these, raw, real, unforgettable. And maybe, just maybe, the next one will remind someone else that they matter too. We'll see you in the next one.